Today, we're digging into something a little different, a really fiery, almost hour-long YouTube review of the fictional show Starfleet Academy. We're going to break down the arguments, the passion, and, what it all really means.
So here's our game plan for breaking this all down. First, we'll set the stage with the reviewer's overall take. Then we'll dive into his problems with the characters and the plot, his views on the show's representation, and we'll wrap it up with his, let's just say, very clear final verdict. Okay, so the reviewer analyzing comes from the YouTube channel Heels vs. Babyface. It's all about episode 5 of Starfleet Academy, and it's basically a deep dive into one fan's pretty profound disappointment with where the show is heading.
And he does not waste any time getting to the point. This quote right here, it's one of his opening lines, and it really sets the tone for the entire critique, just this sense of total disbelief.
So where does the reviewer really start his teardown? It's with the characters. For him, the show's biggest failures really begin and end with how the main players are written. His main target is the protagonist, a young hologram. He actually comes up with this derogatory label for her, which we're showing you here, and he uses it over and over again to really hammer home his point about her intelligence, or what he sees as a lack of it.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the disconnect, right? On one side, you have what the show is probably aiming for, this unique, special character who's learning and growing. But on the other side, you have what the reviewer sees, just a childish, narcissistic character, a huge gap in interpretation.
And his critique doesn't just stop with the protagonist. He argues these flaws are everywhere. He calls Holly Hunter's character a terrible leader, says the supporting cast is completely one-dimensional, and even calls out another character, Caleb, for being a Gary Stew. You know, that term for a male character who's just a little too perfect and can do no wrong. And this leads us right into his next major pillar of criticism. See, for him, the flawed characters aren't the root cause. They're just a symptom of a much bigger problem with the actual plot and the writing itself. He really hones in on what he sees as this massive plot hole in the main character's backstory. He asks, how can this race of holograms, which was literally created by organic beings, send one of their own to learn about organics, and then turn around and claim they don't know what organics are? He says it just doesn't add up. And building on that point, he just rattles off this whole list of writing choices he finds totally unacceptable. Things like having characters talk directly to the camera to explain stuff, or throwing logic out the window just for a character moment. He also feels the dialogue is way too simplistic and is especially annoyed by a side plot that he thinks had real Star Trek potential, but was just thrown away for a couple of cheap jokes. And all that criticism culminates in this very harsh, very direct quote. In his view, these aren't just mistakes. He believes it's a deliberate choice to dumb down the franchise for a different kind of audience. This brings us to his next big theme, the show's approach to representation, and specifically, its focus on the sexuality of its characters. He actually kicks this section off by making a numbers-based argument. He literally tallied up the number of explicitly LGBTQ+ characters they've introduced in just 5 episodes versus the number of heterosexual relationships. And according to his count, he came up with a ratio of 8-to-1. So from there, he argues that for many of these characters, their sexuality seems to be their only real defining trait. He claims that this focus, when you combine it with what he calls the retarded writing, has basically pushed actual plot and character development right out of the picture. And to back this all up, he pulls out several specific examples from the show that he thinks prove his point. He mentions the introduction of 3 gay Klingons, a gay drag queen bartender, and what he interprets as the next episode's premise being solely about sex. Okay, so you take all of these points about the characters, the plot, the writing, the representation, and they all funnel down into his final overarching verdict on the show. He basically concludes that the entire 57-minute episode was fundamentally empty. In his eyes, it did nothing to move the story forward, nothing to develop the characters, and it offered no meaningful message. Worse than that, he felt like it was actively disrespecting its audience. So his final verdict isn't just a thumbs down, it's a total condemnation. He argues that the show is just broken at a fundamental level, from the writing all the way down to what he sees as its core message. A message he believes prevents any real character growth from ever happening. And that really brings us to the big picture, doesn't it? Breaking down a review this passionate, this raw, isn't just about one person's opinion on one TV show. It kind of opens up this much broader, more complicated conversation about the relationship today between creators and the longtime fans who feel such a deep sense of ownership over these beloved worlds.